Hi, in this paintFX tutorial we're going to look at creating a custom brush. A really simple one, but one that's pretty useful for a lot of animations. We're going to make it's either microvilli or a villi brush, either on the surface of a cell or something lining the airways or the gut, or I guess just the gut. Um, you could use it for doing sort of something with flagella-like animation too. Um, and I have I think, a little render here. Yeah, so here's a render of what it looks like. So you can see that it kind of falls apart at the bottom. It just fades out because this is a paint effect. So it's got a lot of stamps, so it looks smooth along the edges, and it's sort of glowing in the middle to make it look a little bit translucent. The colors changing up, but it doesn't. The bases don't really matter too much because you're not going to see that when you have a big crowd of them. I've just got the camera moved out a little bit. But this is good for a background sort of effect. Now they can be used for foreground effects too, but you can, for that you may want to create the brush in paintFX, and then you can actually turn it into a polygon object that you can do more complex rendering with, and we'll talk about that in a later tutorial. So let's just look at how you can create something like this. I can't remember exactly how I created that one, but it's just through experimentation really. But usually when I want to create something, I'll look in the visor for a brush that is sort of similar to that. And I think for this one I went down to the underwater brushes and found the anemone. So let's say I'll just take the anemone and I'll draw some. So it's kind of similar. It's got a big central tube, and then a whole bunch of these are either leaves or twigs or buds or something. I don't really need them, so I'm just going to open up the attribute editor and go straight into the brush here, and let's just look at changing some of the settings. First of all, the brush width and all that kind of stuff I can change later. It's one thing I didn't point out, there's this global scale. Now, this is a useful thing if you create a brush that's used in one scene and then you take it to another scene where everything is modeled at a totally different scale. Rather than going in and changing the width and the height and blah blah blah, this is just sort of like a volume knob, so it just turns up everything, so you can make it match your scene more closely. So I'll just turn these up to something a little bit bigger. I can change all this stamp density stuff later once I get the structure of it the way I want. So let's just look at this one for now. You'll notice it's a paint brush type, which is what I want to use right now. And we're just going to go down to tubes. So first of all, we can look at the length min and length max. So that is between different tubes. So right now it's set to, let me just get this closer. 0.1 and 0.15, so some of these will be as tall as 0.15, some will be as short as 0.1, so I can change that range. So I get some that are much taller, some that are much shorter. I don't really want them that tall, but I want them all a little bit taller, so maybe a range of 0.5 and 0.45, maybe even a little 0.3, 0.275, something like that. And the tube width, I kind of want these to be broader at the bottom and end up being sort of tighter at the top, I think. Now first of all, I want to turn off whatever these things are. So I'm just going to go down a little bit. So it's got flowers and buds on it. So if I turn off flowers, those are gone. If I turn off buds, it turns off the just the crimping at the top. I'm going to do that myself here in the tube. So this is one that we're not really using flowers or buds, although we could later on. We'll take a look at some things that we can do. So we've got the width scale here. We set the width 1 and width 2, but now we can use this if we want to maybe have these sort of round off a little bit more. Now one thing you'll notice is that I don't want them to get that skinny up at the top. One thing you'll notice, they get pretty pointy at the top, but I don't have many segments in this object. So I may want to turn up the segments so I can get sort of a rounder kind of feel. And of course I can always do some renders, see what it's looking like. So it's going to look rounded because it's using stamps to do it. So even though the geometry looks a little pointy, we can rely on the stamps to do some of that for us. And remember, these aren't going to be things that we're examining closely. It's stuff that we're going to see from a little further away. So I can do the segment length bias. So if I want more segments up near the top, I can do that, or I can put them down near the bottom. It kind of depends on how it's going to render and how it's going to animate. The stamp density is kind of low, so I'm going to turn it up to, maybe I'll double it, something like that. Yeah, so it looks much smoother now. Maybe make it get a little fatter in the middle and make these smooth. And bulbous at the top, who knows. So all this other stuff you can kind of leave the same. You can play around with them, and it indicates how they're going to lie down or stand up. But we want all these sort of pointed up. And this indicates sort of, it's a bit of a twist and elevation in the azimuth. So that's all we really have to do for that. And if we wanted to, we could use something like flowers or buds to add other things. So let's say we wanted, what are buds? Oh, not buds. Let's try flowers. So I don't really want those things all at the top, but maybe I want little, if these are villi and I want micro villi on them or something like it, I can try using flowers for that. And I don't know if it's the best thing to do, but you can try it. And maybe I don't want them all near the top, so flowers start can be kind of down a little bit lower. Petal length. And so you can change the value of the number of flowers, the number of petals in each, so how many there are around. So you can see it's quite regular. I can't remember if there's a way to randomize it. But here you can flower twirl. No, that's actually flower. So we can add things on the surface if we want to. I don't know what this is supposed to look like now, but it looks funny, so I'm going to turn them off. There is another thing here. Let me just take a look. If it's a mesh object, you can turn thorns on, which is a way to make lots of little hairy-like objects on something. So if you wanted to make something look furry, for example, you could use a thorn. So let me see if I can do that now. Turn this into a mesh. Turn on branch thorns. I don't think I can do that. I have to do it before we get started, so I'll just leave it. But that's another way to add lots of sort of things on the surface, little furry or pointy things like thorns. But the next thing I want to do is look at the color of the object. And so if I just go to close these up, it's a really long menu set. So anything you're not using, you want to probably close. So I'm just going to close tubes here. And so we've got shading and texturing. So let's look at shading. So as I mentioned before, anything labeled 1 and then 2, 1 is going to be the color at the base, 2 is going to be the color at the tip of this tube. So I don't know, what do I want to make it? Maybe some kind of funny color there, and maybe make it sort of brighter color near the top so it looks a little more translucent. I don't know what I'm making here. It looks bizarre. Let's make it a non-offensive color. Let's make a blue one, just to avoid any comparisons to things we would rather avoid. Alright, so it's a blue one. But you have things like incandescence 1 and 2. Incandescence will be as if it's self-illuminated, so if you want to, you can turn up a little bit of incandescence on the top, and it will make it appear that it's a little brighter, as if it's the light's going through. It's a kind of a cheap way to simulate a little bit of translucence, but incandescence always overrides lighting, so incandescence will appear bright even if there's no light in the scene. Then of course there's transparency, so if you want to have it a little transparent at the tip, you can do that. And you can see the difference here. This had a transparency with some color in it. This one doesn't, but I can give it, this should make a kind of a yellow transparent probably. Or yeah, so you can see the transparency there. I didn't see it at first up here because incandescence also overrides transparency. So let's just, I'm making a very ugly thing. I apologize, but I'm just experimenting. So you can see it's very dark down at the bottom. I have no incandescence, and there's some transparency at the top. Sorry, this is at the top, transparency at the bottom. Oh, that's what I was doing wrong too. I also was working with the bottom colors rather than the top. You can also randomize the hue and saturation and value between. So if I want this to be much more random, you can just give some randomness in your object or in your field of villi. And then you can also fade the root and fade the tip. So I may want to fade the root so they're not so dark at the bottom. Now this may be too much, but I can try. So it's fading up quite a bit. But it's also kind of an interesting way to make it look sort of transparent. I could do it with the tip as well if I wanted to. Okay. So you can change all of these things, and I think I'm going to give some incandescence to the bottom and see what that does. It looks too dark. Oops, I did it to the wrong one again. Sorry. Okay, so something like this. I know it doesn't look like anything, but you can just get an idea for what changing the values will do. You can randomize the brightness and things like that as well. Now there's also texturing in here, so you don't have to just use colors, these gradients of colors from the root to the tip, but you can actually map things. You can map this color, map the opacity, even displacement on the object. We're not going to do that now, but you can use some of the built-in, if I just turn on map color, you can use the built-in texture types, or you can actually use a file. So you can, I don't know what this is going to look like. Yeah, so you can map a checker to it, or a ramp, or a fractal if you want to break it up with some noise. Things like this. I'm just going to leave it. And again, you can map a file to it, which could have, oops, I'll turn that off. Which could have some interesting applications if you had a file, an image that you wanted to put on here up the length of an object and have it animate. This would be a good way to do it. Now, I just want to talk a little bit about illumination. By default, it's turned on so these things are illuminated by real lights. So whatever light's in your scene will actually illuminate the object. You can turn that off. If you turn off real lights, then you can set a fake light here, and this just indicates its direction. So it acts like a directional light. It points in one direction forever. It's an expansive light that's not coming from a single point, simulates sunlight. Sometimes you want to do that if there are it's too complex a light setup in your scene and you want to simplify the lights on your paintFX. This is a good thing to do. And for some reason the translucence of the object is set here under illumination and specular as well, so it's not in texturing or shading, but here's where you set those things. So if I turn translucence down, you can see it's like a shaded object. I'm going to turn on my real lights again. So you can see it's like a shaded object here with translucence turned totally off, so it depends on what you want it to look like. You can dial up translucence to get that sort of see-through kind of look. Specular, of course, is just specular. I can give it a bright white. So how it reflects the incidental light in the scene. So this has got a big bright blowout specular on it now. So you can turn that down to reduce that. Now we're not going to talk about this right now, but you can also do shadows with paintFX, but they're not always great. You can do fake shadows, 2D offset, so just projecting a 2D image of itself onto other objects near it, or 3D, it's trying to actually do a 3D cast, and it's not great. If you want shadows, you probably want to convert these into polygons and then render them that way to turn on cast shadows. They also have glow, so I can turn on some glow here. And so you can start to see with transparency and all that sort of stuff with glow mixed in, you start to see the stamps and things like that. So it's not great. So those are all the things you can do with this. So nothing complex, but if I wanted to fill a scene with a simple object like this, it's easier to do it this way, and it's easier on your render time than actually to model a whole bunch of these things and duplicate instances around your scene. And another benefit that it gives you is that it has animation built in. So if I just close these, just to give myself a little space here. So under tubes, you can go to, we saw growth before, that's where we see all the branches, twigs, blah blah blah, but there's also behavior, and there's a whole bunch of other things under here. So we're not going to look at displacement, but you can set things like wiggle and curl to change the shape of the object. Well, let me just look at it since I'm here. We can make them wiggly. You can make them curly. You need a lot more segments to do stuff like that. Forces are not dynamic forces, but how closely it will follow the path, so it will lean down towards the path, or if it's attracted to the path, so it's not going to bend down at its base, but the tip is going to point down towards the path. Now curve follow and curve attract, these aren't going to do anything because we haven't created what are called control curves yet, but we will create those in another tutorial. You can just set some randomization on the shape here. Then you have to set gravity. Deflection means that they will deflect off a perceived floor. So I drew it on this 0 in the Y direction plane, and if they bend down, they're going to deflect off the floor. But here under turbulence, you've got these built-in dynamic animations, so you can tell this to act like grass or trees. So the difference between, or not to act like grass, but to act like grass under the force of wind, or act like a tree. So the difference is that a tree's base isn't going to move very much, but its branches and twigs and leaves will move around, but grass wind, the whole thing will sort of sway. But you can do other types of forces here, but just a really easy one is just to use grass wind. And so if I just close this and play the animation, you can see that they're moving a little bit. So it's a really cheap and easy way to get some animation into your scene. Turn up the turbulence to get something like this. Turn up the frequency. Of course, all these things can be animated. Now there are more other types of ways that you can animate these things, bending and swaying with what I mentioned earlier, the control curves. You can also you can animate them growing too, which is not really necessary in this case, but that's something we'll talk about later on. You can also affect these, you can spiral these if you want to make something like a shell. So there are controls everywhere, and it just takes a little time to to get to know. So if you want to make a fiddlehead or something, you can use the bend to do that. Fiddlehead the plant, I mean. Okay, so let's say we've created what we want to create here, and we want to make this into a brush that we can use over and over again. So we want to select the stroke so we can save this into our shelf here. So I've got a couple of brushes here already, and so now this is a little bit tricky, and it's been documented on the wiki, how to save brushes in paintFX. Hanju Lee wrote this for us. She said I taught it to her. I don't remember doing it, but so you can just follow these simple steps. It's a little bit buggy, and that's why she wrote this, because sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. So we want to go into the hotbox and go to paintFX, reset template brush. So the template brush are the settings we just had loaded in there. We're going to get them again. And she specifically mentions using the hotbox because sometimes it works better when you use the hotbox or the shortcut keys. So now we want to select the stroke that we modified. So let's get the outliner to do that. Yep, so it's this one. So select that. Hotbox, get settings from selected stroke. paintFX, get settings from selected stroke, and then hotbox save brush presets. Sometimes the shortcut Control P works better. So you see what I mean? It's kind of buggy. So now we'll go to paintFX, save brush preset. It should open an option box, and we can call it demo blue Villas. Let's copy that, paste it here, and we're going to save it to shelf. You can save it to the visor, that pop-up window that we get when we're selecting brushes, but you have to make a writable visor. It's a bit problematic. So let's just see if it works. So it's made a brush here. So let's make sure we get out of that brush by selecting something else. And now we'll select the demo blue Villas. And there you go. There's our brush. Ta-da. Now you can see it's interesting. This is set to a different global scale, I think. No, it's not. That's strange. Anyway, let's pretend that it worked, and if you notice any problems, then we'll figure it out later. Okay, thanks.